Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 is coming out sometime next year, so in the meantime, here are 10 things we need to see in the third chapter of the game before it releases. The first thing we need to find out in the third chapter is what in the world is the Playcare location. If you didn't know, at the end of Chapter 2, it is made clear that we are headed to a brand new location we have never seen before called the Playcare. And in the Chapter 3 teaser trailer, we even hear people talking about the Playcare once again.
That is why it is with enormous pleasure that as the founder of Playtime Co, I announce Playcare.
So the third chapter is clearly going to take place in this mysterious location, and it must be important with how much they've been promoting it. However, we still don't know anything about the location itself, although it seems like it will be important to the story. The second thing we need to know in the third chapter is who exactly is the prototype. The only thing we know about the prototype is that he's a character who's been teased a few times throughout cassette tapes, and we even see the mysterious character take away Mommy Longlegs' corpse at the end of the second chapter. He is by far the most confusing character thus far, however, he also seems to be one of the most important, because despite his simple design, he is labeled as the smartest toy in the factory and could potentially even be responsible for the disappearances of the co-workers. However, we don't really know because the developers don't seem to be talking about him really much at all, so I'd hope in this third chapter we could finally get some answers as to who in the world the prototype is. The third thing we need to know in Chapter 3 is why did Kissy Missy help us? In Chapter 2, for the first time ever, we met Kissy Missy, who unlike any other toy in the factory seemed to be on our side, and she even helped us progress through the chapter for whatever reason by lifting up the gate we were trapped behind. And while this was seen as nothing more than a side detail as we moved through the game, it honestly may be one of the most important points in the chapter, because for the very first time, one of the experiments in the factory was actually friendly towards us as the player, raising the question of why in the world she was so nice and what makes her different than the rest of the toys. I've heard quite a few theories about what in the world her purpose could be, but I guess we'll need to wait for the third chapter to find out. The fourth thing I need to know in the next chapter is what in the world happened to Daisy the Flower and why was she a rejected toy? Daisy the Flower, if you didn't know, is a somewhat hidden character inside of Chapter 2, being shown through different little posters and cardboard cutouts, along with even appearing as the original character for Musical Memory before being replaced by Bunzo Bunny. However, for whatever reason, despite her seemingly important role in the second chapter, when the game officially released, she seemed to be entirely removed from the game story-wise, even being reclassified as a rejected toy that they never actually sold. This is an incredibly interesting move by the developers, and it starts to raise some eyebrows as to who Daisy the Flower was and why she was taken off the game. She seems to have some important purpose in the story based on her small yet persistent appearance in the second chapter despite her not being an actual antagonist, and also the fact that there's models of her showing she has the same realistic eyes as the Poppy doll, making it seem as if she herself may also be a toy brought to life, bringing up some interesting theories as to where she went that I'm hoping will be confirmed or busted when Chapter 3 does come out. The fifth thing we need to know in Chapter 3 is who is the actual main antagonist of Poppy Playtime. Throughout the game, we meet mostly enemies, but also the occasional friend like the as mentioned Kissy Missy, but throughout the game, there is yet to be any real clear enemy. We defeat Huggy Wuggy 30 minutes into the first chapter, and the character in the title, being Poppy herself, as we'll talk about in a second, seems to have shifting personalities throughout the chapters, not really giving us a clear antagonist or even really a conflict, since in all reality, we just spend most of the game running through the factory, completing every task that faces us for no clear reason other than to supposedly figure out the mysteries of the factory, those of which we have still been yet to get any leads on, leading to the sixth thing we need to find out in Chapter 3, being how are the experiments slash toys even created. Throughout the first and second chapter, it becomes pretty clear to us that the toys in the factory were for whatever reason actually alive, and in fact we even find little clues and logs proving there is something fishy going on behind the scenes to create these real-life toys. However, something important that I feel like is being under questioned is how in the world did they create these toys in the first place? I mean, clearly they have some sort of supernatural ability to create lifelike things, and based on the logs, they had to combine suitable human beings to different toys, meaning there's some sort of matching system that determines who can be experimented on, and there's even clearly visible red particles shown in the Chapter 3 teaser, suggesting there's even some sort of chemical elements that turn the regular human beings into toys. What's also interesting about this is that we know they tried and failed to bring rats to life using specifically poppy flowers, which, while I don't want to theorize too much in this video, could potentially prove that maybe even they don't know how they turned any of the toys into real life, and when they first created Poppy, they may have thought that the poppies were somehow magical after they created her for no reason. But it's still a bit too vague to make any clear calls, which is why I hope we learn more about this in Chapter 3. The seventh thing that I wanted to find out in Chapter 3 is the infamous question, where in the world did Huggy Wuggy go after he died? In Chapter 1, we defeat Huggy Wuggy, and of course, as we all know, we finish him off by dropping a box box on his head, knocking him all the way down into the void below us. However, what's interesting is we revisit this exact void once again in chapter 2, where we can see in a different room on the railings that Huggy Wuggy fell down into the lower floors of the second chapter. However, for whatever reason, we have no real idea where in the world Huggy himself went, because while we could see where Huggy fell down to in chapter 2, we don't ever see his actual body, bringing up theories such as the prototype dragged his body away like how they did with Mommy Longlegs, or that Huggy could have even survived and crawled through the vents in the room he landed in and escaped. As of right now, we don't know for sure exactly where he went, but he clearly seems to be incredibly important to the plot with how many times we've seen him show up throughout the game. The next and 8th thing I want to know in chapter 3 is what are Poppy's intentions with us in the factory? As I'm sure you've noticed, Poppy Playtime herself seems to have very altering personalities throughout the game, seeming awfully friendly at times like in the beginning of the second chapter, with her mood shifting to angry and almost evil by the end, where she forces us to keep digging deeper into the factory, changing the tracks of the train we escape on to take us to a new location. This starts to bring up questions about the ethics of the Poppy doll, because on one hand she seems to be willing to help us and on our side, while on the other seems to be using us for her own gain by forcing us to go into play care when chapter 2 ends. It's an incredibly interesting phenomenon because it starts to bring up a trust issue where we don't know if Poppy is wanting to help us or actually hurt us, and hopefully in chapter 3 we can figure out her true intentions. But with that being said, the 9th thing I want to know about also relates to the Poppy doll, and it's who even is she? We can already see the names of some of the toys in their human forms, for example Mommy Longlegs having the human name of Mary Payne, so this then brings up a burning question of who in the world is the Poppy doll herself. Her life clearly has some significant importance to Playtime Co, as we can immediately tell she is the most sentient compared to the almost savage other creatures throughout the factory, and she is also sealed behind walls when we free her in chapter 1, presumably for experimentation, meaning for whatever reason something was different about her and she was way more valuable. In fact, I don't even really need to prove her importance. The name of the damn game is Poppy Playtime, so clearly she's really important. But with that being said, people are wondering who in the world she actually is, and we even have some leads as to who she may be already, because we hear about the owner of Playtime Co, Elliot Ludwig, losing a family member himself while founding the company, bringing up the theoretical possibility Ludwig could have actually turned his missing family member into Poppy to immortalize her forever. But in truth, we really don't know right now, and I'm hoping chapter 3 gives us some answers to this burning question. Anyway, the final and 10th thing we need to learn about in chapter 3 is who is the Jack-in-the-Box toy? If you don't know who I'm talking about, in a random 1-year anniversary post by Poppy Playtime, they made a bunch of different teases regarding a brand new character who appears to be some sort of Jack-in-the-Box monstrosity. It was teased a few times and it clearly seems to have some sort of significance, potentially even in the 3rd chapter. In fact, I made a whole video about it. Here it is if you want to learn more. Anyway, subscribe and peace.